Hello, web programming students. Welcome to week 6. So we'll talk about flexbox and CSS grid this week. Let's start with flexbox. With flexbox, we can make rows and columns. To use the flexbox model, we must make a parent element, the flex container. So in our case, this will be the unordered list. And as soon as you set this display property to flex, the unordered list automatically becomes the flex container. And then the child elements, these li guys here, become flex items. So using display flex, we've now turned this into a flex container. The flex container is the parent element, and you've set display flex for that. And then the flex items are the children elements inside that flex container. So once we have that set up, then we can set the direction of the flow of the items. So you can set them to go horizontally or vertically or reversed in both directions. So using flex direction row, which is the default, you can make things go left to right. You can do row reverse and make them go right to left, or you can make them go top to bottom in a column, or you can make them go bottom to top with column reverse. So we'll see this in the demo. I'll show you what these all look like. So flex direction row, here's what the flex direction looks like. 1, 2, 3, 4. Very simple. In a column, 1, 2, 3, 4. So now we can do things like wrap. So wrap is a fancy way to say that, or a short way to say, when the available space within the flex container can no longer house the flex items with their default widths, you can break them up into multiple lines. So the flex container adapts to fit all the children in, even if the browser needs to be scrolled horizontally. So we can use wrap for this. So the default is actually no wrap. So if we don't have this on at all, then things won't wrap. And so they'll squeeze in as much as they can. Otherwise, we can wrap them or wrap reverse so that it maintains the default width of each of the flex items. So in the flex box with the flex wrap on, the flex will accommodate the children. It'll squeeze in as much as it has to. Otherwise, if you put wrap on, then they keep the same size they have, and then they just wrap automatically. Justify content, it defines how flex items are laid out on the main axis, sort of like a text align. And so the justify content property, you can do flex start, flex end, and you can do center, and then you can have space in between your items, and you have space all around your items, and I'll show you what that looks like. So flex start is the default, and it all starts to the left and goes in the direction. Flex end, they all stick to the end and go like this, or we can center them. So space in between, your end flex items stick to the ends, and then there's space in between them here. With space around, they get some space on the left side here for this leftmost one, and then the right side here for this rightmost one. So that's space in between, and that's space around. With align items, the property defines how the flex items are laid out on the cross axis. So you can have flex start, end, center, stretch, and baseline. So let's see what that looks like. Flex start, they're up at the top here. Flex end, they're at the bottom here. Stretch, they take up the entire height. Center is here. We'll see that in the demo. And baseline, I can show you that as well. We can do multi-column layouts using flexbox. So what we need to do is wrap the columns in a parent container, the flex container. We'll add display flex, of course, to our container. Then we'll add flex direction row, not column, to flex container. And then we'll give each column a width of pixels or percentages. And optionally, we can use justify content to determine the column spacing. So I'll show you an example of that. You won't have to do this in the demo. So let me show you that right now. Here is an example of a column layout, a multiple column layout in flexbox. So I'll give you the code for this. You can see what this looks like using the same rules that we just saw. Here, we've made a multi-column layout. Let's get into CSS grid a little bit. So I'll introduce CSS grid. You won't have to do a demo on this, but so that you are exposed to it, we'll go through it a little bit. CSS Grid is a layout system that's similar to Flexbox, but more powerful. CSS Grid is said to be two-dimensional, whereas Flexbox is supposedly one-dimensional. However, in practice, they're both two-dimensional. But CSS Grid is more powerful in that you can set columns and rows more easily or more precisely than Flexbox. Grid and Flexbox actually work well together, so you may see instances where there's a display grid, and then you have parts that are flexboxed. Grid layouts are easier to manipulate with media queries, which will be next week's main topic. Next week, we'll talk about responsive web design, which uses media queries, and grid layouts are really good for that. Bootstrap is a CSS framework that people use to create websites quickly. Some of you who've had me for class before have used Bootstrap. Their grids are made with Flexbox, not CSS Grid. So there's a lot of overlap of Grid and Flexbox in the world. And if you use Bootstrap, you'll be using Flexbox automatically to make grids. There's a misconception out there that CSS Grid is for full page layouts and Flexbox is only for smaller components. Again, there's a lot of overlap in how they work and how they're used. So it's not solely full page layout using CSS Grid and not solely smaller components with Flexbox. CSS Grid is better for precise placement of content. So if you really need to have precise placement of content, if you want things overlapping, if you want things kind of broken up, and I'll show you some examples of these, CSS Grid is the one you want to use. Flexbox is a little bit better for flowing content. So if you really need to have your site, your content flowing better in different screens, then Flexbox is potentially a better option. And with CSS Grid, there's no need for floating and clearing like we saw last week. It takes care of all of that. So the parts of a CSS Grid are, first thing, you need to have a grid container similar to a Flexbox parent container. And instead of using display flex, use display grid or display inline grid. Usually it's display grid. The grid items are similar to Flexbox child flex items. And so you can have, these are the things that go inside your grid container. Also, you need to set up grid lines. So you can have horizontal grid lines or vertical grid lines like this yellow one here. Grid tracks are the space between two parallel grid lines. So like these lines here are parallel. The yellow grid, the grid track is here in yellow. A grid cell is the space between two adjacent horizontal and two adjacent vertical grid lines. So basically the cell is your grid cell in yellow. The grid area is the space in between any four grid lines. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Here's your grid area in yellow. And so you use all those to make a grid. And we won't get into how to make one in depth here, but if you want to, you can go to csstricks.com. You've got a complete guide to grid here, how to make CSS grids using the containers and items and tracks and lines and stuff. Or also you can go to gridbyexample.com and they have example code there for you to make grids. So let's get into demos. So we will take these list items here and turn them into flex items, which these aren't wrapping, but they will flex like so. That's our first demo. Our second demo, we'll take this and put it in the center. This also flexes. So let's have a look in Atom. Before we get into the demo for real, I want to show you one thing in terms of folder structure. We haven't had any subfolders and had to deal with them in our code so far, but now I want to start introducing subfolders to help you organize your content. And so I like to have my style sheets in a separate folder. So my folder is called style, and then I put all my style sheets in it. And when we reference them in HTML, we have to write them slightly differently. So in our link href, we have to actually say the name of the folder here. with a slash and then the actual name of the file of the style sheet there. And so whatever the name of your folder is, that goes here, as long as it's not in the same level as your index file. So we used to have our index files and our style files in the same folder on the same level. But now that we've made a subfolder and put my style files there, I have to reference that subfolder in my href link part. So unless you don't keep your style files in a separate folder, you don't need to do this. But for more organization, I like to do separate folders. And so I'll put my style sheets in a style folder, put my images in an IMG or images folder, and that just keeps things organized in my folder structure. So now let's get into adding code, our flexbox code, to make our demo, which starts out like this, into this. So our code, I'll just show you what we have in our HTML. We got our standard stuff here, and then in our body we have an unordered list, and then we have 10 list items, and then by default they're listed in vertical order here. And what we want to do is make them horizontal. So you could use flexbox in a way to make menu items that line up nicely like this. And so let's go into our CSS for that. Our CSS file for this one is called style/style.css. So in my folder, open up my style sheet. And right now I have some of the code already here. This is the style code. We don't need to do anything with this. What we want to do is add our flexbox CSS to this. And so if you look back at our HTML, our parent element is this unordered list UL tag here, and then the flex items, the children, are in here. So in our style folder or style file, the UL is our parent container, and so this is what gets display flex. Back to our browser, 3, 2, 1, refresh. Now we have a flexed parent container. So by default, it was flex direction row, but we should add it in here just to keep track of what we have in our flexbox code. So if I go back to the browser, if I refresh 3, 2, 1, nothing happens because the default is flex direction row. So we can play around with this, do row reverse. So if I save this, refresh, 3, 2, 1, refresh. Now, let's move this over. Now this is row reverse. It changes the order of the list items. And so you can, if you make a navigation out of this, then you can have your items stick to the end here in reverse, or we'll use other properties to order them up. But let's take this off of row. Let's show you what it looks like in column. So if I switch this to flex direction column, 3, 2, 1, refresh, now it goes back to column form. And if we switch this to column reverse, you should see it flip. 3, 2, 1, now it is flipped. It goes 10 to 1 instead of 1 to 10. So that's flex direction. We'll switch this back to row. So we can keep moving. Back to row. And now let's look at our second demo. Here's our second demo. We want to go from this to this, so it's centered in the center here, vertically and horizontally centered. So let's go back to Atom for this. This is index 2 in your demo folder, which is corresponding to style 2. And so I have some of the style here, but we'll have to add the flex container and flex item stuff. So we'll go to display flex on the container. So let's save this, go back to our browser, back to our demo one, 3, 2, 1, refresh. Now we have our items in display flex. By default, they're flex direction row. We can change that if we like. So let's go back and put that in just so we can see what happens. Flex direction row, 3, 2, 1, refresh, nothing happens. We can make sure that it still works by using row reverse. Just see what it looks like, 3, 2, 1, refresh, and now we got 3, 2, 1 over here. This is row reverse. Let's switch this back to row. And now let's start to do some other things. So now we can use justify content. Now we have our options: center, flex end, flex start, space around, space between. Our default is flex start. So without doing anything, do the flex start. So 3, 2, 1, refresh. We go back to left justified. Now let's do some, let's try the other ones. Flex start is one, flex end is one. 3, 2, 1, refresh. This is flex end, and the advantage of this is that it doesn't reverse the order of the items. So if you wanted to have a left or a right justified navigation for your website, you can use justify content flex end to push them all to the right. So let's see what other options we have here. We'll skip center, we'll do center last. I'll show you what space between looks like. So justify content, space between, 3, 2, 1, refresh. Now there's a little bit of space here, but that doesn't count as much as there's big space in between our 2 and 3 and our 1 and 2. And if we switch this to space around, then we'll get a little bit of room on either side of the end item. So 3, 2, 1, refresh. Now this is space around. So there's space here. So this is like 1 unit of space. This is 2 units of space. This is 2 units of space, and here's 1. So it's very evenly spaced out. And if we were to change the size of our window, it maintains that same ratio, or space around, that is. Finally, we can do center. And now this is the way centered. Now our demo, our final product, should look like this. So to get to that, we need to start adding the align items property. The align items property goes here. Align items. So we have baseline, center, flex end, flex start, and flex stretch. So flex start again is the default. Oh. And so I'll show you what that looks like. 3, 2, 1, refresh. Nothing happens because flex start is the align items default. Now we can start to do some different things. We can do flex end, which should pin it to the bottom of our little container here. 3, 2, 1, refresh. Now there is here at the bottom. Instead of flex end, our other options include baseline. Let's see what baseline looks like. 3, 2, 1, refresh. Baseline looks like flex start. Won't use that. Other option is center. 3, 2, 1, refresh. And now we have our list items, list items horizontally aligned and vertically aligned, similar to our final product for our demo. Let's go back to our original demo and show you what flex wrap looks like. So we go back to our first demo of the day here. Right now, they are flex no wrap. So let's get into some wrap options. So now we're going to go and close this. Go to index. This is our index. Our CSS for this one is style. So that one's here. We have display flex, flex direction row. Now we can start to specify our flex wrap. So by default, it's no wrap. So if I put this here, I'll show you in our demo that that's the default. 3, 2, 1, refresh. And when we squeeze this in, it does not wrap. So this is actually our default state. So if we go back here and start change it, we can go to flex wrap. 3, 2, 1, refresh. And now when I squeeze this in, it starts to maintain the default width of each of the little green guys here and wrap accordingly to the size of our window. So that's nice. Like I mentioned before, if you have to have a certain way this flows, then flexbox is the way to do it. If you need to have a more precise look for your code as far as layout is concerned, then grid might be better. So just to show you what I mean, this is a broken grid kind of look. This is on CodePen, but if you squeeze this in, then the grid changes, and you can't do this with Flexbox. You can only do this with CSS grid. So it still maintains a nice look, even though there's things that are overlapping or so-called broken grids. So you can use grid for this more so than Flexbox. Let's get into our final two demos for the week. Here's the first one, which has a layout of a website. There's a header here, some navigation, and some content here. We'll start out with this and add Flexbox code to make it into this. So here's this navigation. We'll apply some Flexbox code to this. These 4 content pieces will also have Flexbox applied to it. Right now, they're stacked vertically, so we're going to make them line up in a row. And so let's go into our atom. And just to show you what we have as far as HTML is concerned, in our body, we have a div with a container that has everything in it here. And then this header piece corresponds to this here. We have a nav. And so within that nav, we have an unordered list and some list items. That's here. See, that's already styled up. Then we have a section here with an unordered list and some list items. And so we'll flex these. We'll actually have a class on them already here, flex container, and then the flex item so you can see. And then that's this part here. And then we also have a footer, but there's nothing in there. Nothing's showing up for our footer in our demo here, so we won't bother with that, but we'll apply some Flexbox code to this and to this. So over in our CSS, here's what we have. We have our CSS reset as usual with margins and paddings and borders reset to 0. Our background color of 333, that's all of this here, this dark gray. Our container, now I have some widths here in percentages and a background color of white. That's all here. Margin 0 auto, that centers the site in the browser window. And then our header, this part here, I have a new unit here that I haven't showed you yet. This is called a viewport height unit. What this is, it divides the viewport, the height, into 100 units. And then this height is 25 of those. So this takes up 25% of the height of this viewport. So if I shrink this, then it changes size automatically. So that's VH, viewport height. You also have viewport width, also in terms of 100. So we may see that later on this demo. And so I made this height 25 viewport height units. And it's got a background color, that's this dark green color. And then here's our navigation code. Nothing in our nav yet. We have a class of navigation. And so we took off the bullet points and got a background color for it. That's this here, or really this here. The navigation and the button, which is here, the navigation buttons, these links have a class of btn. That's here. And then the A link is styled such that it has Barlow condensed, a font size of 20, a font weight of 500, text decoration, none, so that gets rid of the blue underline. little bit of padding in 0.75 ems, color, FF, it's white, display block, text transform uppercase, and letter spacing 1 pixel, just to move the letter forms apart a bit. And then if we hover over those links, and then the background color will change. This is this color here. And then for our columns, this part, so far they're just like this. We have a section with a background color, and then we have a flex container. The container itself is 50 viewport height units, list out type none, so no disks, no bullet points. And then the flex items themselves, the background color of this tomato red, they're 20% width each of them. They have a height of 40 viewport height units. Again, same font size, weight, color, and text align center, like so. And so we need to add flex style to the container and our navigation. So the first thing we need to do is add display flex. Once we add display flex to our navigation, this is here, class navigation. 3, 2, 1, refresh. Now they're lined up nice and neat now on the left. Of course, flex start is the default, and so we actually want to have them on the right. So to do that, and move them over. To move them over, back in our code here, that one is justify content flex end. So once we add justify content flex end, that should move all of our navigation links to the right. 3, 2, 1, refresh, and now here they are properly located. So now we've finished that, we can move on to this part. This is the section or HTML, which has the 4 columns like this. So we need to add some flexbox code to this part. So that's down here. We have a flex container, and so we'll have to add display flex to this. So once we've done that, 3, 2, 1, refresh. Now they're lined up left to right as we want. We do need to space them out a little bit. So how we can do that? Go back to our code here. We can do justify content. Now, last time we did flex end, so that moved them all to the right, but we want to have a little bit of space in between each of the, or around each of the columns there. And so that is space around. So if I save this, go back to my browser, 3, 2, 1, refresh. Now we have our space around. So there's some space here, space here, space here. If we were to have done space between, let's show you what that looks like. 3, 2, 1, refresh. Now there would be no space on the left side or the right side of the end. So we want space around. So I'm going to change this back to space around. And that's what we want here. And our final piece of this has some space here and here. So we don't have any here. We want to move this down a little bit. So in our code here, we're going to do align items. Now we can do flex end. That's just the flex start is the default. We could do flex end if we wanted to, but we want to do center. So center is right here. 3, 2, 1, refresh. And now we have our columns in the middle, centered both horizontally and vertically, just like our finished product here. And so that's demo 7A. That's our third demo of the week. And then our next demo, we want to have more of this kind of layout. So similar to our first one here, but we have some text here. We have a picture here. We've got a border here, some extra HTML here. I'll show you some extra CSS things. But first, this is what we have. This is a bit of a mess. So we can, again, put some flex on this and flex on this to get them lining up nice like this. So let's go into our code for this. This is index 2 under demo 7B. just to show you what we have HTML wise, here's our div. Again, container div has everything in it. Header, we got a nav, same thing as the last one. Our section's a little different this time. We have a section with an unordered list, a flex container, which has a flex item with some text in it, and then another flex item with a picture in it. And so again, I like to use folders for my pictures, photos, and images. So I have an IMG folder, so I have to put the name of it here in our image src HTML tag. Again, we have a footer here. There's no, actually, we do have some styling for our footer here, different color to this. So let's look at our CSS for this. Our CSS, again, we have a CSS reset. So margin 0, padding 0, border 0, same background color for the body, same styling for the container as the last one. Again, the header is 25 viewport height units. For navigation, it's very similar, so we'll need to add some flexbox to this. The buttons are the same as the last one, so we don't need to change anything there. Same for the hover. This is the hover state. Now our columns are slightly different. I'll show you what we have here. We have a background color for this section, which is FFF, that's white. Our flex container, it's got a list not type none, so no bullet points. A height of 60 viewport height there, padding 0 and margin 0 again. And then our flex items, same color background. This is largely the same as the last one, 20% width. Added a height of 54 viewport height here, same font family and such, size and weight and color. Here's something new we haven't seen yet. Class flex item with this first child, this text that's here. So all of this is the first child. The first child flex item of the parent container is flex container is this list item here. So everything within this flex item here, this H1, this P, that's the first child. The next child, also known as nth child 2, the second child is this picture here that has the dotted border. So in our code, in our HTML, this is the second, this is nth child 2, second child of the flex container. And so when we reference this in our code here, this flex item, the nth child, the second one is this width here. This is referring to this child of the flex container here. So you can have first child, which is the first thing that's flex item underneath the parent, and then you can have any number of nth child. So if you have multiple children of the flex parent container, you can specify which number gets this code, gets this styling. And then you can also reference the image that's within the second child, this nth child 2, that gets this code, this styling. So let's start to flex box this out. Navigation gets display flex. 3, 2, 1, refresh. Now we are properly lined up. Just need to move it over to this end. And to do that, justify content, flex end. 3, 2, 1, refresh. Now we have this in the proper location. So now we need to style up these guys to get them lined up properly here. So back in our code here, we want to go down, flex container. That one needs to be display flex to establish the row. 3, 2, 1, refresh. Now we have this lined up properly, although now it needs to be spaced out a little bit better from here. So we have a few things left to do. So we've added display flex to the container. We need to justify content. space around. So let's save this, 3, 2, 1, refresh. Now at least we have some space around here and here and here. We're getting closer to what we want from here. Next thing we need, align items center. So that should move them into the center vertically. 3, 2, 1, refresh. Now we got that lined up nicely. And that matches our final product here. Again, display flex, justify content, and align items.